Hello, my friends. How are you today? It's Easter Sunday. Maybe a strange way for you to think that I would start a video, but I did just come back from church. Easter. It's an interesting day for me as a witch, as a Wiccan, and as a pagan. It's also an interesting day for me as a Unitarian Universalist. I get bummed if I go to church this particular Sunday, the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the spring equinox, Easter Sunday, if there is not a wisdom offered from the Christian tradition. You don't always find it in every Unitarian Universalist church, because some of the congregations just don't have enough Christian members, and the congregations are people who've been exploring other ways of being spiritual. Well, then there are some Unitarian Universalist church which are still very connected to the historical roots of Unitarianism and Universalism, which are Christian. So you get a little bit more wisdom from the Christian tradition. One of the few gripes I had about my old Unitarian Universalist church was our minister very rarely preached words of wisdom coming from Christian sources. And as far as I was concerned, that was against the principles of Unitarian Universalism, which is to honor the wisdom in all traditions. So I went to this first Easter Sunday at my new church, not knowing what to expect. And I was pleased with the experience. Oh, the first thing I wasn't so pleased about is my meditation group is responsible for the coffee and snacks after church. I guess all the different covenant groups in the church take turns doing that, and I guess it was our turn. Not really something I'm particularly fond of, I have to admit. Oh, I didn't mind purchasing the fruit to take in. We all volunteered to bring in something. But setting it all up, cleaning up after it, well, it's going to be my least favorite thing, perhaps, that I do. But the rotation will come around to us every now and then, and I'll just have to deal with it. It is what it is. But I want to share a little bit about the Easter service at my church today. It wasn't billed as an Easter service per se, although our minister declared that the contemplation for the day would be resurrection, and she referred to it as Resurrection Sunday. I understand from some Christian friends that there are Christian denominations now that are referring to Easter more often as Resurrection Sunday than Easter. I don't know for sure about that. Not my experience, since I don't go to Christian churches. But I was all perked up because it was obvious then if she was going to talk about resurrection that there would be words of wisdom aligned to Christian wisdom today. And our minister did not fail me. The service started off by dedication of some young people in our church. I'm not really quite sure what that means. My old Unitarian Universalist church didn't have dedication of children, as I recall. Oh, when the children were of an age that they wanted to become a member of the community. It was part of the process of teenage years. There was an opportunity in a service to welcome into the community, but I'm not sure what dedication means in the Unitarian Universalist sense, because we shouldn't be dedicating our children to anything in particular. We basically think it's up to them down the road to decide for themselves. So I need to do a little more research into this church's take on dedication of children. But it was still wonderful to see the families of 3 sets of children be part of. I need to sit straight, or my back's hurting a little bit. Yeah, I had to broom the entire floor in the receiving area of the church as part of the cleanup, so I'm aching a little bit right now. So anyway, dedication of the children was only wonderful. It was wonderful. But I was left confused, dedicating them to what? It did appear that it was more like opening up to the congregation to accept that we are responsible for these children and the sharing of our wisdom and supporting them through their journeys. So that I totally got. But on to then the sermon. Our minister began a service I'm inside right now and away from my computer because Roger's again on the porch watching TV on his computer. Yeah, now I have to find other places to do my videos. I'm in the living room now, which I can in the daylight do videos in here. So it'll work out fine, but I don't have my computer at hand. So I've forgotten who said this quote, so I'll add it in when I edit. Joy and woe are woven fine. That led to a very interesting sermon that had to do with the concept of death and resurrection being in everything in us that dies, that provides an opportunity to be reborn, aligned to the season of spring and rebirth and regrowth. But also aligned, this sermon seemed to focus mostly on a journey into woe at the psychological level. And our minister used the word guilt. Guilt. There are two words that are not part of my spiritual vocabulary. One of them is forgiveness. I don't know if I've ever shared anything here about my take on that, but forgiveness is not a word I choose to use, nor do I relate to it. Acceptance, absolutely. But forgiveness is not something that's just part of my life experience, let's say. It certainly wasn't part of my religious instruction. Guilt. That's another one that I had to stop and think about. I've been guilty of drinking too much or eating too much. So I guess I have that words in my vocabulary when it comes to things, particular things I can identify. As far as feeling guilty, not too much in my life. Although I have a feeling there are other words I might use to describe that same feeling, like sadness or sense of disappointment in myself or some other equivalent, but without actually using the word guilt. And now I understand why. I've never related to guilt spiritually as a word in my vocabulary after the discussion today. So our minister was referring to the fact that we all carry, in addition to the joys, the woes that the author refers to in this quote. Also, if I can find the rest of the quote, I'll put it in, because it was a beautiful, beautiful quote from a poem, I believe. But her whole sermon focused on the things in life that are missed opportunities to act out of a place of connection or love. Because she's saying that's really the only place that guilt arises in our life, that we should have done something differently, that maybe we didn't come from a place of love or connection, or as a missed opportunity to be there for someone or to be engaged in a situation in a positive way. So there's all kinds of words that go along with the guilt: sorrow, disappointment, a sense of failing another or failing ourselves. But in the end, she was saying that part of the human condition of living is we'll have the joys and we'll have the woes. We're going to have the things that we did in our lives that we're not proud of, that indeed we should have done differently if we'd been in tune with the moment and in tune with our heart at the time. Missed opportunities to love often give rise to the feeling later on of guilt. I'm not someone who's ever, and my friends know this well of me, I'm not a what if I had person. I don't revisit the things in my life, but I know that I harbor in my heart times when I wished I'd been a better partner, a better friend. Oh, I remember times in which I felt I could have been a better granddaughter to my grandparents, especially as they were aging and dying. Woe. Oh, woe is me. Not a self-pity party, but the ability to realize that that experience, the emotions that come along with feeling that way, are part of living. Not to deny ourselves the feeling, not to pretend we don't feel that way, not to gloss it over in our emotional history. She talked about those opportunities. She referred to it as guilt. The things in our life that sometimes, even though we wished we'd done differently, it's not possible to go back and redo in any way or make amends, as something that needs to be released into resurrection. And understanding that it's part of our life experience, and if nothing else, we have now learned more about ourselves, more about our relationship with others, by some of the things that were left undone or done in a way that in the end didn't speak from our heart or from our wiser self. So she ended up having a sermon that had to do with death as experienced as guilt, remorse, woe. And the fully embracing of the emotion attached to that, acknowledging it as real and present and an important part of our living, of what becomes part of the pieces that make us up. And also aligned to spring, aligned to the example of resurrection of Jesus. It can all be transformed into something else. At any point, we lift it up to that. She talked about finding the living amongst the dead and used a Bible verse, which I will not quote directly. I'm sorry, I don't know it. Where those who went in search, where those were buried, in search of their hopefully risen Christ, were challenged by others. Why are you searching for the living amongst the dead? And she grew that into, if we spend too much time in the woe, and the woe is me, and the guilt, if we use that word, for the opportunities we missed in life to be our better self, especially when it's too late to make any kind of amends or make it different for ourselves or for another. If we're spending more time on that, we're looking for the dead, instead of looking for the living amongst the dead. The bright things, the things that have been positive in our life, when we have been our best selves, when we have loved without any selfishness, where we have no regrets. I think woe and guilt, to me, would best be described in my vocabulary as regret. And she said, if woe and guilt and regret becomes an overwhelming sense of who we are in the world, and we're focused on that to the exclusion of looking for the living things in our life. The wisdom she was sharing was looking for the living amongst the dead, even at times when it feels like we're surrounded with the woe, or the woe is me, or the guilt, or the regrets. She said that all of us can learn from the season of spring and from the lesson of the risen Christ, that in small and great ways, in mundane and spiritual ways, we all encounter through the length of our lives, in the small moments, perhaps even at the end, according to where our spiritual beliefs take us, the possibility of resurrection. There's a balance, she said, I have my cheat sheet in front of me. She said there's a balance in our lives between despair and hope, and the essence of resurrection, of reviving in ourselves our will to live, and the way we celebrate our living is the part of us which is equal to hope. And she suggested grace. She said if we want to live from the place of grace, we know there's always a way forward, no matter our regrets and our woes and our guilt, because out of them is always, for the true seeker, the possibility for transformation. She says if resurrection is nothing else, it's the possibility of transformation. Joy and woe are woven fine. Our lives are both, at sometimes leaning more heavily towards one or the other, but always woven very carefully and intricately, woven fine throughout the tapestry of our life. What an opportunity then if we look at regret, even if we use the word guilt in association with that. What an opportunity it is to look at that. Well, this is part of my life. This is part of what I experience in life. What will I make of it? How will I enter into my relationship with those regrets with a sense of hope, for transformation, and the resurrection in the honoring of the alive part of my life, the celebratory part of my life, your life, all of our lives. That was a great sermon. And this Wiccan pagan, love the inspirations that she took, well, not literally, from the story of the risen Christ. How do you relate to Easter? My Christian friends out there, I'd like to know what your most powerful relationship is to the experience, actually the journey of this week, and his death and his rebirth. And for my non-Christian friends, can you find meaning in this season? The meaning of the season tied into spring and the promise of resurrection, literally, in the world around you. Easter always feels very much like Lammas to me. The emotions that I feel at Lammas, Christian friends, are very powerfully feeling right now. There's always that thread, finely woven, that has to do with sacrifice too. Sacrifice to something greater, purpose. That's a whole nother conversation, isn't it? So I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on this. And excuse me for waxing a bit sermon-like. You could tell this sermon gave me a lot to think about. That's why I wanted to share it. And that will be it for today. We are going out to dinner tonight, last minute. Made plans with friends who suddenly realized for the first time they're going to be without family on Easter. And they were uncomfortable with that, so we're going out to an Argentinian restaurant. Maybe not the typical Easter fare, but I can tell you there will be paella in my future this evening. Okay, my friends, I found the poem. It's by William Blake. I don't know if the title of it is Joy and Woe or Woven Fine, or whether this is just a line out of it, but here's how it goes. Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silk and twine. It is right it should be so. We are made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go. And in the end, our minister's focus was the line that says, we were made for joy and woe, and when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go. Her take on this was, humans, our experience of being human and living human encompasses both the joys and the woes of the experience of living, and if we deny both, we deny our very humanity. And I do have. This is the one that was left over from yesterday when my camera went dead. And the question was, you're always talking about how much you love the place you live. Surely there's something about it you don't like. Or something like that. Yeah, I do go on and on and on because, yeah, I am in love with where I live and so many of the fine aspects of the people who live here too. But nope, it's not all giggles and roses. There are some challenging things about living here. I need to be in the closet, generally. I can only come out to a few Except, of course, when it comes to my church, in which case I'm out. I've got my 2 sets of pentacles on actually today from going to church. And that environment, I can be totally free. But there is a powerful energy and commitment to conservatism in this county, in this state of Delaware. It changes a little bit the farther north you go in Delaware because you're getting close then to Philadelphia and New York, and some more metropolitan views, some more diverse neighborhoods and community where we lived before we came down here. Not at all like it is down here, even though it's only a 2-hour drive away. Down here it's conservative. The word liberal is a dirty word. A vast percentage of the people that live in the neighborhood I live in are Donald Trump supporters. Maybe if I said that and said nothing else, you'd get a clue what it's like here. Not an easy place to be a liberal. Our candidates will never win here. We can make very little direct influence on the political activism, but we can make a lot of influence at the social level and social activism level in the county. It's difficult to be someplace like this. It's been compared to me since I moved here, and I would have to agree that southern Delaware is definitely part of the Deep South. It has very little relationship to traditional northern values from the liberal sense. So that's a challenge about living here. It can be a very confusing challenge, I have to admit. People I love and respect deeply, who love and respect Donald Trump. It's hard for my brain to get that. I try to understand, and I try to understand from a place of love. That can be challenging, though. It's also difficult here because there are no museums, there are no art museums, there are no theaters, there are no opportunities for the arts. Very few, at least. There aren't places to go outside of nature to be inspired and to be moved. The balance to me is nature more than makes up for that. But I've never lived someplace where to get to a true theater, you drive 3 hours. To get to a museum, you drive at least 3 hours. It's different for me because I have been used for many years to living in a metropolitan area where there was always something to do. It stimulated the creative side of your brain. Man-made, let's say, rather than here where it's nature-made. I miss things like a bookstore. I miss things like, believe it or not, a mall. I love to walk around malls. I'm not a mall shopper, but I love the energy, the human buzz, like it's a big old human beehive of activity in a mall. I love the presence of other people. I'm saying that now as the summer season begins. At the end of the summer, I'll be telling you I'm done with the presence of other people. But there's always a steady energy living in a metropolitan area that has to do with, I think of our old house and the time of year we would open our windows to hear the music, the lawns being cut, cars being worked on, children playing, all the sounds of a neighborhood. I don't think I appreciated it until we moved away from all of that I actually liked it. It's not a downside to lack that here. We get it all summer long. But I'm very aware in the winter time that there's a human energy that I used to thrive on that I didn't know was affecting me as powerfully, positively as it was. The biggest downsides for me are lack of any kind of a cultural environment and the fact that it is such a 100% conservative environment when it comes to politics. Really, the Republicans aren't even conservative enough for most of the people we know down here. It would have to go to the extreme of the Tea Party. And even then, we have acquaintances that are far more conservative even than that allows for. So there are downsides. In a way, we gave up a cultural society and gave up being part of a liberal society. You learn to make your liberal contributions and make your differences where you can. But I wasn't unusual where we lived before. I was a pretty common example of the mix of ethnic groups and spiritualities that were part of where I lived. And here, it's just not that way. So the human interaction here, if it weren't for the fact that I'm now involved in my church and involved with 125 like minds, is lacking for me. But oh, the land and the comfort it brings me, and the learning it has given me that of finding the places that I can feel connected to, and learn to respect and love people who are just not much like me in general. In a way, Roger's a better fit here when it comes to community. And that's why I think the time came when I needed to reach out and become a member of my church and become very involved in the things that my church does. And because I need to be back in connection with a liberal community. So yeah, there's a downside to living here. I know that some of you have expressed where you live, you can't be open about your spirituality and other aspects of your life. Some of my gay and lesbian friends live places that they can't even be honest about that. So I guess we all have our trade-offs of why we live where we live and what it offers us and what we wished it offered us. So I'm not in any way complaining. Yeah, it is one of those it is what it is situations. I've yet to live in a perfect place, I have to admit, that has the balance of what I need. But this is a fine place to live. Just like I say, it's a fine day. It's a fine place to live. It suits me, although at times it does frustrate me. Thanks for that question. It took me to a place where I could appreciate some things I hadn't given thought to before, especially the learning I've had of how to live amongst neighbors and community that really don't feel much like kin, and how you make that work and how you develop a kinship relationship when you're so very different. And with the blessing, too, of my new family at the UU community, where I'm not different at all. I don't have any tiny moments for you today. I'm going to wrap this up so I can get this edited. Won't be online to do any editing later on today. I wish those of you who watch my videos that are Christian a most blessed holiday. I hope you appreciate that. Learned a thing or two with the example of your very special holiday handed to me today and the wisdom of the teachings from your wisdom book. Thank you for spending this time with me, my friends. It's a good day.